Yeah. I think it's time for me to get real about the miscellaneous activity that goes on uh, via uh, my own creativity and the voices that I hear in my head. Um, the voices aren't nothing substantial. It's generally when I think along conspiratorial lines, and even now I can't remember a great deal of the content of what goes on, but they're just fragments of thought. It's like thought broadcasting, where I believe I'm telepathic and that this really is, uh, an international conspiracy overseen by the military. And, for me, I've grown in the sense that initially I was overwhelmed by it and thought that um, that if someone wanted me dead, then they could do so. They could end my life, and no one would be any the wiser. There are people smart enough to do that, and especially if this conspiracy was endorsed by governments. So for me, it got me in touch with a lot of the trauma that I'd suppressed from my early childhood. And on one particular occasion, it was a near-death experience, and it was incredibly frightening. I was so traumatized that I had an out-of-body experience, but enough of that. You um, what I've come to realize is that my imagination, is very, very childlike in the sense that, uh, Freud talks about internalizing a good object. And for me, I experienced an amputation, because my mother was a source of traumatization on one particular occasion, initially. So what I internalized was self, the narcissistic aspect of the ego, where I guess, I don't guess, I've come to understand that, um, for me, there's a thing called self-love, and that encompasses a broad array of human experience, whereas I experience self-love in a narcissistic sense, where I become engrossed and infatuated with my own libido. I'm a sex addict, and um, it's diminished over the last few years now that I'm in my middle years. But I lived essentially to reproduce, and that's what trauma uh, and an inability to self-regulate, um, entailed. Where I thought that sexual orgasm was the ultimate feel good. Heroin addicts, it's heroin. I never got to try that, fortunately, because if it's as good as what some people make it out to be, then I wouldn't have come back. I don't think I'd be here today. So it's it's difficult. And you know, having been traumatized at critical stages in my early childhood where my libido was circulating and generating feelings of splendor and wonder, and then being immediately followed by, assaults, that were brutal, sadistic, and cruel in nature. I have never been able to formulate healthy relationships of an intimate nature, with either males or females in my entire adult life. Sure enough, I had friends and associates, while I was at school. But since I've been in recovery, you know, and my mental illness has become acute. You know, um, I lead a pretty isolated existence. Because of that false guilt about being a human being. Having being critical and judgmental, um, being angry, making mistakes, and things along those lines. I didn't have room for that in the inner realm that I generated in order to insulate myself against, severe abuse and neglect. So that inner realm was a sanctuary, and in it, my imagination could run free, and I could create and envision and kinesthetically experience, feelings that were indicative of some kind of normalcy in my life. And I guess that was stimulated by witnessing portrayals of that within the media. Um, I don't remember a great deal of the content, and I can't seem to find it online, or especially on Netflix. But there was a movie called On Golden Pond, with Jane and Henry Fonda. And, I remember snippets of that, of a troubled teenager, that went to stay with his grandparents for a while. And, it all ended in a positive manner. And, I think I identified that as a child and would have liked to have seen that happen, but it wasn't meant to be. My family is really, really toxic. So what has brought this all on is that I still subscribe to this thought broadcasting in my mind. Especially when I'm feeling, uh, I'd describe it as innocent and naive, but it's like the donkey and the carrot, so to speak. I get an idea, and it's like someone else responds to that. My ego gets a boost. I think, I've been given creative license in this game that basically is very, very childlike in the sense, that you've got Google, whose parent company is Alphabet, Microsoft, IBM, Bill Gates, IBN, N is the 13th letter of the alphabet, and then you've got Apple, A is for Apple, and for me, I guess being very, very self-seeking, I thought that I could circulate, in those upper echelons of society and hold my own, so to speak. I thought that I was worthy of a salary, a six-figure salary and things along those lines. But, in reality, I could never find the motivation or dedication to commit myself to educating myself, to move in that direction. My short-term memory loss is very, very poor. I find it difficult to retain new information. So basically what's taken place in the course of my recovery is that, I've learned to identify the fact, that my feelings and emotions are very, very infantile, especially when it comes to self-expression. I'm very insecure and neurotic in reality or social settings. Um, and that's basically, because I never wanted anyone to come into my inner realm, because I wanted to soak up all the glory for myself, so to speak. And, then I'd unleash my omnificence upon the world and would be, you know, transformed, or we'd go through some process like Genesis, and, everyone would, you know, um, worship and venerate me. I never quite deluded myself into thinking that I was a prophet of some kind. My game was profit, PROIF, PROFIT, and PROPHET, profit or profit. And that's the game that, catapulted me into um, hyper arousal, so to speak. I love stimulants in the sense of nicotine, Coca-Cola, sugar and caffeine. And, I guess this morning, I haven't eaten that much. I've had some chips and a sausage uh, bun. And, I've only had 2 cans of Coke. But I guess, part of me is getting sick of, being the donkey with the carrot, so to speak. Where this voice in my head says, no, not now. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to know about it. It's like it's trying to manage this game that reality anyone can play. But generally, most adults have moved beyond that kind of activity, whereas I think that it's ingenious. And, um, you know, I thought that, yeah, it would astound and captivate the world for eons to come. When in reality, it's just a way of like doing jigsaw puzzles or not jigsaw puzzles, crossword puzzles or Sudoku or things along those lines. You know, but for me, in my imagination, I think there'll be a dividend for it, because that's what I'd like to see take place. But whether the movie, um, whether it goes along the lines, or society evolves along the lines of that movie. I can't think of the name of it now, but where society breaks up into 5 different factions. There was a female playing the lead role, and she was a divergent. Divergent. That was the movie, and things along those lines. So it's not that overwhelming unless, of course, you still fall victim to the conspiratorial machinations that were employed in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The James Bond uh, conspiracies and things along those lines. That's what I thought that hacking and cracking would entail. When it's about self-discovery. Um, for me, I had an epiphany. Because I heard this voice in my head said, "I knew you'd take it to the top," and my response was, from top to bottom or clean house. So I thought that even in politics, it was just therapeutic in nature. Where people got to get to know a full, they came into a full knowledge of themselves due to the stress and pressure they were put under the public and media spotlight. Um, so when I first had that thought, and Barack Obama was, running his campaign, and I thought there's no way in the world a little nobody like me could be so brazen as to suggest that, in politics, there are people with mental health issues. When reality is that kind of endeavor attracts a lot of people with personality disorders, because they have the um, constitution to engage in that sort of activity for prolonged periods of time, without feeling the depths of the despair and despondency and all those things that a normal human being is susceptible to. They have support and advisors and things along those lines. Whereas I've pretty much done this all myself. So a voice in my head just said if he posts this online, he's dead. So it's not real nice. Um, I guess I've learned to be comfortable um, with the fact that I'm on a disability support pension. I can lead a pretty good life here in Southeast Asia, but I guess I'd rather be dead than be subjugated by an experiment that is just delusional in nature. So I generate, my own worst fears. It's like that movie with Dustin Hoffman, where they're in a submarine or a subterranean oceanic station, where, at the end of the movie, they find a United States aircraft that had crashed, and it was from the future, and it had this machine in it that, when people came in the vicinity of it, your worst fears came to fruition. So I guess a lot of this kind of rhetoric, people would be triggered by, especially with schizophrenia. For me, I guess I see it now all as circumstantiality, and I get engrossed in it. Um, it's what I spend, most of my day thinking about. Either rehashing my past or, participating in this kind of self-generated, self-delusional fucking activity. It's not getting on with my day. It's not really living. And I guess I'm finally shaking myself out of self idolatry. And I had to look that up, and it means extravagant admiration or devotion to oneself. And when I connect with that inner child, that is initially what I experience. Devotion to oneself and admiration. For my ego and what it can construct, which it believed it was legendary, and the voices in my head told me so. Or asserted that. They mentioned that I was a genius, and that's far from the truth. I am a schizophrenic or schizoaffective disorder. It's either one or the other is still up in the air, and I'm starting to really understand the liabilities of my mental application, and starting to feel a sense of reward in that, instead of thinking that I can become a billionaire by gambling. And people are going to manipulate the lottery if I just keep all this stuff to myself, for another 5 years. And then it'll be 5 years after that, 10 years. Oh, we're sorry, you fell through the cracks in the floor, so to speak. Getting agitated, because these people have let me down and led me off. And it's all just in my own head. So it's, psychosis. Whether I need to up my meds or not, I don't really know. But, I feel like I have a capacity today to understand that I am unwell. And that I do go through this process of denial, where I think, that I'm onto something. And, it's just obsession, a fixation with glory, because, most young children are self-seeking in nature and want to rise to the top of their peer group, so, yeah, there's nothing special about me, in the sense that, I have all the hallmarks of a defective human being. And it's only by opening up and being honest with others that, it gives them a chance to, critique me and give me feedback. Whereas in my own splendor and self-revelry, I do circulate. I can see now as though I am some kind of divine human being. And, there's a young child that lives in the commune here, and she's only 18 months old, and that's about the same time as I was initially traumatized by an abusive parent. And I can look at her when she's out interacting with her siblings, who are, 10, 12 years old. There is another child that is, around 2 years of age. But, I just see, it's just pure joy, pure elation. There's not too much diversity or intellect involved. It's just about, the egocentricity. And I guess that's what I've learned about, my impulsivity is still that of a fucking child, especially when I get creative. I start to get ambitious. I start to desire. And basically, all I'm after is a big bottle of milk, an endless supply of milk. You know, that's the analogy that I'd use, except that, you know, what uh, what negates that is the fact that, that's when I'm irrational. That's when I'm emotional. And then to come back down into reality and say, hey, that was a trip. Um, I was fanciful in nature, wishful thinking, grandiose. But, for me, I think it's enterprising. And I mistakenly believe that it's going to be my salvation, and it's just ludicrous, so, I guess other people have been caught up in what this, that's what I speculate about anyway, and, it's either therapeutic or otherwise it's a conspiracy, a therapeutic conspiracy, so, yeah, I guess I looked up the word the other day, palpable. Can't tell you what it meant off the top of my head, but I think it means substance, tangia. It's tangible, and a lot of what goes on in my mental activity, I'd like to see I'd like it to become tangible, but that's not the case at all. It's just like a little kid high on red cordial. And yet, I think it's profound. It's good, the positive thing about it is that I get in touch with excitement, exhilaration, optimism, and hope. But, 12-step fellowships believe that hope is a message that you try and carry to another individual. I've gotten fucking high on hope in the sense, with my mental illness, it's created an affect, which is so alluring that I get drawn into it, and it leads me into psychotic thinking or psychosis. So yeah, I like to consider myself as just being stable, rational, and grounded in reality. So it's been nearly half an hour and no one's come knocking at my door with loaded weapons or anything along those lines. And, here I was thinking that I was going to let it all out, when it's basically just circumstantiality and, distorted aspects of delusional thinking that I think are going to be factualized by this huge conspiratorial theory. And, I am going to be the one, that gets the reward, so to speak, for being loyal, obedient, and a, a good patron, and it's just shit, so that's what people would like you to believe. So fuck the intelligence agencies. Um, and yeah, I am a well sick cookie. That may sound paradoxical, but I'm feeling capable, strong, and the only uh, the only thing that I have in my life today is my mental illness, and I feel as though I am starting to get on top of it, and feel okay about it. So feel free to comment or subscribe if you want to hear some more um, corrupt and delusional activity. I'm an expert on it. I have survived it. Bye for now.